Gerald William Booth, you will be conditionally discharged for 12 months. The clerk will explain that to you.
This means that you're not being punished for this offence, but if you commit any other offence within the next 12 months, you can be punished for that offence and for this one as well. You're free to go now.
Alan Bradley, you are charged that on the 2nd day of January 1989, you dishonestly, with a view to gain for yourself or another, or with intent to cause loss to another, procured the execution by an employee of the Weatherfield Building Society of a valuable security, namely a cheque in the sum of £15,000 by deception, namely by falsely representing you were Leonard Fairclough, the lawful owner of number 7 Coronation Street, Weatherfield, and entitled to a mortgage in respect of the said property. How do you plead?
Guilty.
You are further charged that on the 13th day of March 1989, you assaulted Rita Fairclough, thereby occasioning her actual bodily harm. How do you plead?
Guilty.
My lord, these pleas are acceptable to the prosecution.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Would you like to address me?
My lord, I've discussed this matter with my learned friend outside the court, and I was aware of the pleas the defendant intended to enter today. This has given me the opportunity of considering those pleas in consultation.
And we've listened to what she's had to say. Under the circumstances, we feel able to put you on your trust to this court and give you a conditional discharge for 12 months, which means that provided there's no repetition of such behavior over that time, the matter will then be forgotten about.
Thank you, Your Worship.
The court will adjourn now for 15 minutes.
Done, please. Well?
Marvellous.
Thank you.
Stephen McDonald, stand up.
Listen, I'll tell you what, they went very easy on you, son. I hope you realise that.
Of course I did. 100 quid fine. They couldn't have been much easier on you, could they?
You sound disappointed.
Stephen McDonald, it has been pointed out to me that you are considerably younger than your co-conspirator and that you were, at the time, dependent on him for your employment. Be that as it may, it was you who drove the car without a license and who then lied to the police officer who attended the scene of the accident. This can hardly be put at Webster's door. Taking your recent record into account, I sentence you to 200 hours community service. Kevin Webster, you may feel that you were drawn into this against your will. Nevertheless, you were certainly older than Stephen McDonald and in a position of authority over him. You must therefore bear considerable responsibility for what happened. For this reason, I have decided to fine you £800.
Malcolm Fox, you were an active participant in this conspiracy. The only thing in your favour is that you pleaded guilty. I sentence you to 12 months imprisonment to commence at the end of the sentence you're currently serving. Victoria Francis MacDonald, I believe you were very much under the influence of your husband in what you did, and that therefore a sentence of 12 months imprisonment suspended for 2 years is appropriate in your case. That means you remain free if you stay out of trouble. Stephen James McDonald, I'm convinced that you were the prime mover in this conspiracy. You used your wife and your wife's money to corrupt the defendant Fox while hoping that you yourself would remain in the shadows. Your aim throughout has been to preserve your own freedom at any cost, even if it meant your wife going to prison in your place. In this you failed. I sentence you to 2 years imprisonment. Take them down.
Jonathan Lindsay. You deliberately impersonated Ian Jenkins and forged his signature to procure a mortgage. This is a criminal act which rightly carries a prison sentence. However, I am satisfied you feel remorse for what you've done, and your plea of guilty is to your credit. I also recognize that your better judgment was clouded by your infatuation with Deirdre Rashid, and that she exploited this to the full. Therefore, on the count against you, conspiracy to obtain a money transfer by deception, I pass on you a sentence of 6 months imprisonment, suspended for 2 years. I hope for your sake that we never see you in these courts again. Deirdre Ann Rashid, the jury has found you guilty by a unanimous verdict of all the counts against you. You are clearly the orchestrator of this serious fraud, and your offense was aggravated by recruiting someone else to assist you. You ensnared a vulnerable married man, then coolly and systematically exploited him for your own material gain. I have heard the pleas for leniency from your counsel, and I recognize that you are without previous convictions. However, I can give you no credit nor offer any leniencies following your pleas of not guilty. Unlike Jonathan Lindsay, you strenuously denied these crimes and have shown no remorse whatever. I have no option but to pass on you a custodial sentence. On count 1, conspiracy to obtain a money transfer by deception, I sentence you to 18 months imprisonment. On count 2, obtaining property, specifically a gold card by deception, I sentence you to 6 months imprisonment. On counts 3 to 10, theft, the 8 separate counts of stealing £500, I sentence you to 12 months imprisonment. And on the final specimen count, that of obtaining property by deception, I sentence you to 6 months imprisonment. All these sentences will run concurrently, making a total custodial sentence of 18 months. It will begin immediately. Do you understand?
Yes.
Have you anything to say?
I didn't do any of it.
Right. Take the defendant down, will you?
James McDonald, the sentence of the court is that you will go to prison for 8 years.
No. No, you can't.
8 years? He should get life for what he's done. He killed my son!
You can't!
I don't believe this. 8 years.
Silence! Take the prisoner down.
Jim. No, please. No, no, no!
Yes. Well, we have taken your statement into account, as well as your previous good character, as a result of which we're prepared to grant you a conditional discharge for a period of 12 months.
And Leslie Battersby, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
You find the defendant guilty, and that is the verdict of you all.
It is.
I thank the jury for their service to the court. Given the defendant's history, I see no necessity for further reports and intend to pass sentence once we have heard any plea for mitigation. Mr. Rivers.
We find the case proved and the defendant guilty.
Yes. Don't believe it.
Hiran Makwana.
Who? Shh, that's his real name.
Guilty. Next time you see a sick fish, I suggest you call the RSPCA. With regard to punishment, there are several options open to us, up to and including a custodial sentence.
Kelly Louise Crabtree, you are charged with 5 offences of theft in that between the 10th and 13th days of May 2006 you stole varying sums of money totalling £238.50, 3 credit cards and a ring. Are you guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Tracy Lynette Barlow, guilty or not guilty of murder?
Guilty.
No, this is not right. What are they talking about? We've got this stolen for Tracy.
No, you've got it wrong. You've made a mistake.
I knew it.
Order, please.
David, sit down.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Mr. Webster, I've thought long and hard about your case. Now, you've committed a very serious offence, and I see no alternative but to send you to prison for a total period of 28 days.
What?
Now, unless you are released on supervision, you will serve half your sentence in custody. If, after your release, but before the end of the period covered by the sentence, you commit a further offence, you may be ordered to return to custody to serve the balance of the original sentence. This may be in addition to any new punishment for that new offence. Any time you have spent on remand in custody in connection with the offence will count as part of the sentence to be served, unless it has already been counted. Do you understand? Mr. Webster, do you understand?
Yeah.
David Platt, we have read and considered the pre-sentence report. We looked carefully for any gesture of remorse. We found none, save that you had the good sense to plead guilty. Neither a fine nor a community sentence can be justified. We may have taken a different view had you not compounded the damage you caused by assaulting a police officer. We are therefore going to make a detention and training order. This will be an order for 4 months, which, in our opinion, matches the seriousness of the offences.
No, that's ridiculous.
Had you not pleaded guilty, the sentence would have been for an order of 6 months.
I'm sorry, Mum.
John Stape, your offences of kidnapping and false imprisonment are so serious that only immediate custody can be justified. You kept a young woman prisoner for 5 weeks, and although true she suffered no physical harm, she must have been terrified throughout, never knowing her fate. If this had gone to trial, I would have imposed a sentence of 3 years imprisonment. By reason of your guilty plea and other mitigating circumstances, I'm reducing that to 2 years imprisonment. You will serve at least half of this sentence in custody. The time you've been remanded will also count towards your sentence. Take him down.
Of the murder of Tina McIntyre.
Guilty.
And is that the verdict of you all?
It is.
Thank you, members of the jury.
No, they got it wrong. They can't do this.
However, based on the evidence and testimony heard today, we feel you have demonstrated a blatant and complete disregard for the law at a level of irresponsibility that this court finds disturbing. You have also shown, and continue to show, little or no remorse for your actions. despite being afforded ample opportunity to do so. In relation to the charge of possession of cannabis, this court finds the defendant guilty. In relation to the more serious charge of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, this court also finds the defendant guilty. The court will adjourn sentence in your case, Miss Armstrong, pending the preparation of a pre-sentence report. Until that hearing, you will be released on bail on the same terms as before.
Would the foreman of the jury please stand? Have the jury reached a verdict upon which they are all agreed?
We have. Now, what's your money on?
Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty of the murder of Kylie Platt?
Guilty.
Oh, thank heavens for that.
It's a disgrace! He's a kid! We'll get you out, Clay. We'll get you out.
Maria Connor, you have pleaded guilty to unlawfully helping Pablo Duarte to remain in this country. You didn't profit from this arrangement, nor do I believe you would engage in such conduct in the future. I give due credit to your guilty plea and hitherto spotless character. However, it is nonetheless incumbent upon this court to send out a clear and unambiguous message to deter all those who would seek to circumvent immigration law in this fashion. I therefore sentence you to a term of 12 months imprisonment. No. Take the defendant down, please.
All rise. Stand. Could the foreman of the jury please stand? Has the jury reached verdicts on all defendants, on which they are all agreed?
Yes.
On count 1, do you find the defendant, Nathan Curtis, guilty or not guilty of rape?
Guilty.
Yes. On count 2, do you find the defendant, Nathan Curtis, guilty or not guilty of conspiracy to commit rape?
Guilty.
Do you find the defendant, Neil Clifton, guilty or not guilty of rape?
Guilty.
Do you find the defendant, Ian Yardley, guilty or not guilty of rape?
Guilty.
Do you find the defendant, Christopher Blackthorne, guilty or not guilty of rape?
Guilty.
Madam Foreman, has the jury reached a verdict on which you are all agreed?
We have.
Do you find Anna Windus guilty or not guilty of wounding Sebastian Franklin with intent to cause him grievous bodily harm?
Guilty.
What?
She didn't do it! I didn't do it! I didn't push them! He's made fools of you all!
And to Mr. Windus's victim personal statement, it is clear to me that not only is this a serious offence, but you failed to surrender to the court. I do accept this offence warrants a custodial sentence. However, I do also take into consideration your guilty plea and the mitigating circumstances put forward on your behalf. With that in mind, I sentence you to 18 months in prison, suspended for 2 years. You'll also be required to carry out 100 hours of unpaid work. Mr. Platt, you've been very lucky on this occasion.
Abigail Franklin, I sentence you to a custodial term of 16 weeks.
16 weeks will fly. I love you, all right?
On the charge of fraud,
do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
On the charge of money laundering, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
And on the charge of bribery, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Silence in court. Are you all right, Mrs. Metcalfe?
Would you be?
You will be taken back to prison while I consider the sentence, then returned here for sentencing tomorrow. Court will reconvene at 1 p.m.
Court rise.
I didn't do it. Platt, please stand. In light of the evidence, Mr. Tilsley's admission and taking your mitigation into account, I am now persuaded that you were not the instigator or ringleader in the crime committed against your grandmother. However, I cannot ignore the fact that you are already on a suspended sentence and therefore am obliged to activate that, at least in part. I take into account your guilty plea, the time that has passed and your family circumstances, and hereby sentence you to 8 months in total, serving half in custody and half on licence. Please be seated. Mr. Tilsley, please stand. Whilst I commend you for ultimately taking responsibility for the crime in question, I cannot ignore the fact that you lied to this court. So, by your own admission, the decision to defraud Mrs. Roberts was, in the first instance, yours alone. For this reason, you can only receive a custodial sentence of 2 years. However, the law forces me to take into account a number of mitigating features. Your previous good character, the fact that you have no previous convictions, that you have a business upon which many people depend for employment, and that you suffer from a medical condition upon which the impact of prison would be significant. When I consider all these factors and apply credit for your guilty plea, albeit limited due to my findings, I am able to suspend this sentence for 2 years. There is an argument to say that you should be serving a custodial sentence too, Mr. Tilsley. So please, consider yourself very lucky. You're free to go. Take him down.
No, you can't do this. It's not fair.
Quiet in the gallery.
I think it fair to grant you a sentence of 4 months. Suspended for 2 years. And a fine of £500.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
The crime of which you have been convicted is a serious one, in which the victim, Grant Newsom, was gravely injured. I have listened with care to the evidence and to all the submissions made on your behalf by Mr. Habib, who has said everything that could be said. The fact that you did not know the extent of the injuries you caused is of little consequence. This offence is so serious that only a custodial sentence can be justified. And the least possible sentence I can impose, having regard to the seriousness of the offence, is one of 8 months' imprisonment. Take him down.
No, you can't do this.
Court dismissed.
It now falls to me to sentence you in respect of both the assault and criminal damage, which you have pleaded guilty to. In coming to my decision, I have taken into account your guilty pleas and obvious contrition. I accept a genuine misunderstanding lay at the heart of this unfortunate incident, and that it arose, at least in part, from your desire to do something positive for the community. But there is a much longer-term, more deep-rooted behaviour pattern which I cannot ignore on the basis of a few weeks' voluntary work. This was both an act of significant criminal damage and sustained verbal abuse, culminating in physical assault. I understand there were wider issues at play relating to your past, but this does not excuse a wholly unacceptable act of violence. Indeed, nothing I have seen or heard suggests to me that were similar circumstances to arise, you would not respond in precisely the same reprehensible fashion. It is, with this in mind, the ongoing threat I believe you may pose to the wider public, that I have to consider the full range of sentencing options at my disposal.
Would you both stand, please? Mr. Windus, for perverting the course of justice, I am sentencing you to 8 months in custody. However, taking into consideration the time you've spent on remand, you're free to go.
Oh, thanks, Your Honour. Good luck.
Seems very lenient. Fingers crossed she'll be out within a year.
This is worse than being in the headmaster's office.
Miss Windus, you have pleaded guilty to the crime of grievous bodily harm. The court acknowledges your honesty in making such a plea, and I have taken this into account when deciding your sentence. You have also made a submission that the alleged crimes of a Mr. Raymond Crosby be acknowledged in mitigation. However, Mr. Crosby's trial is ongoing, and as such, he remains innocent in this court's eyes until proven otherwise.
That flaming pervert gets away with everything.
Furthermore, it remains the case that the victim, Mr. Adam Barlow, was not your intended target, and demonstrates how ill-conceived your assault was. This was a reckless and premeditated attack on an innocent man. For this reason, and despite your guilty plea, I feel I have no choice but to hand down the harshest sentence available to the court. 3 years in custody.
Have you reached a verdict on which you all agree?
Yes.
Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Are you mad? I'll appeal that. Are you mad? That's a joke. I'll appeal it. That's a joke.
Quiet!
Justice is a joke.
Quiet, please.
And despite the seriousness of the crime, I'm taking into account the difficult situation at home. It can be very traumatic for any child to have parents split up. But don't have to tell you that, do I? I'm also encouraged to hear about the familial connections Hope has locally, and that her family are all here today to support her.
Looking good, kiddo.
I'm persuaded that the best place for Hope is at home. I'm imposing a youth rehabilitation order, which means that she will be required to attend therapy sessions, as well as any other requirements that the rehabilitation team may deem necessary. Hope will need a lot of support and understanding, and this will be mostly down to you as her family. I can only reiterate how important it is for all of you to pull together. Thank you.
Kelly Neelan, please stand. Can I ask you, Madam Foreman, have you reached a verdict upon which you were all agreed?
We have.
On the count of murder contained in count 1, do you find the defendant Kelly Neelan guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Mr. Connor, can you state your full name and date of birth, please?
Ryan James Connor, 14th of January 1992.
Address?
Chariot Square Hotel, Gridley Road.
Nationality?
British.
You have been charged with theft. How do you plead?
Guilty.
Then we can move on to sentencing. The police report.
Count 1, attempted murder. Count 2, preparation of terrorist acts. Blake Myers, how do you plead?
We're going to be heroes for this. Guilty.
The charge against Max Turner is as follows. 1 count, of encouragement of terrorism. Max Turner, how do you plead?
Guilty.
Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
The defendant will be remanded in custody pending the sentencing hearing, which will take place on a day to be fixed. All parties will be notified of the date in due course. This case will now be adjourned pending sentencing reports.
Court rise.